Hey YouTube, Ruckman from Crew3 here with another weekly deck tech for you. This week we're taking a look at something that really blew me away in testing, 4-color Omnath. Wait, where are you going? No, come back. I promise it's not that deck. Think of it as more Omnath tribal or 4-color elementals. Like always, we'll start at the low end of our curve with the 2-drop slot. This deck plays 4 different 2-drops accounting for 16 cards total. Tangled Florahedron is an excellent way to get things going, acting as an early game mana dork, a late game elemental trigger, or as an emergency land in a pitch. Next up is Brushfire Elemental. While this aggressive beater looks out of place in our more mid-range strategy, it allows us to apply a good amount of pressure early game while drawing the attention of early removal spells, and it's not out of the ordinary to get at least 3 to 4 landfall triggers in the later points of the game. Our penultimate 2-drop is an elemental that needs no introduction, Voice of Resurgence, an on-tribal powerhouse that forces our opponents to play only during their turn or risk growing the elemental horde. Our friendly 2/2 elk also leaves behind a friend if it does happen to be in a well-timed fatal push. Lastly is the honorary elemental of the bunch, Lotus Cobra. This deck is all about hitting our land drops, so we might as well include this little serpent to help push us along. In a similar vein to Brushfire Elemental, Cobra helps us gain momentum in the early setup periods of the game before pushing the boundaries once the stack becomes awash and all the various triggers you're soon about to see. With most of those triggers, of course, coming from this week's lone 3-drop. Risen Reef is the reason to be playing this deck with the focus on elemental synergies. This 1/1 for 3 lets us look at the top card of our library when it or another elemental enters the battlefield under our control, and if we can see a land, we can put it on the battlefield tapped for an easy landfall trigger. Even if the card on the top is a land, or we for some reason don't want to put it into play, it gets put into our hand instead. So once Risen Reef is in play, every subsequent elemental entering the battlefield shows our opponent what Nature's Wrath truly looks like. And don't even get me started on what the stack looks like when you get multiples in play. Now it's time for our main course, the Omnaths. We're starting with 4 Omnath Locus of the Royal. This angry teamer 3/3's enter the battlefield ability helps deal with threats on our opponent's side of the board, while its landfall ability helps power up our 1/1s while drawing us extra cards surprisingly fast, as having 8 lands in play is no problem thanks to Risen Reef. Then of course we have 3 copies of Omnath Locus of Creation. The much tamer and Pioneer 4-drop does exactly what it's intended to do, gain us life against the aggressive decks, get us ahead on mana after a series of Risen Reef triggers, and then deal damage directly to our opponents. What more could we possibly want? Lastly, it wouldn't be Omnath Tribal without at least 1 copy of Omnath Locus of Rage. This singular 6-drop is the real spice of life here, giving us a nice dead man's switch against wrath effects and allowing for long-running chains of Risen Reef. It also lets us turn redundant copies of the other 2 Omnaths into burn spells by making use of the legendary rule. With only 1 copy, it sounds like that angry jelly bean will be hard to find reliably, which is where our non-creature spells come in. To start, we're playing 3 copies of Genesis Ultimatum. Genesis Ultimatum is the perfect way to help get multiple landfall triggers while advancing our board state at the same time. And depending on the right combination of hits, expect to fill up the stack with a cascade of Risen Reef and landfall triggers that keeps feeding into themselves. In a similar vein, we're running 2 copies of Turn Timber Symbiosis. This mythic spell land allows us to dig for one of our game-ending Omnaths, an evasive Brushfire Elemental, or a clutch Risen Reef, giving the deck a fair amount of card selection while of course being able to act as a land when needed. Rounding out our spells is 2 copies of Shatterskull Pass. Just like its green counterpart, Shatterskull Pass gives our deck a little extra oomph in the removal department, while also having the ability to act as a key land drop if needed. Before covering the mana base, I suggest those faint of heart or with weak constitution look away now, because this isn't going to be the pretty selection of lands you've seen. Starting with shock lands, we're playing 3 Breeding Pools, 2 Stomping Grounds, and 2 Temple Gardens. Green is our central color, so we can only really afford to play green shock lands as 2-color options. This selection also takes into account that Risen Reef is probably the MVP of the deck, so blue is in my mind the second most important color, and we also need 3 blue mana to cast Genesis Ultimatums. Next, we're playing a whopping 7 Triomes. Thanks in part to the lack of turn 1 plays and the lack of reliance on our 2-drop slots, we can play a large number of tap lands to help ensure that we hit all of our colors as needed. 4 Ketchery Triome allows us to have a tri-land of our most important colors, and 3 Rogarin Triome gives us access to all of our secondary colors in a single land. Lastly, as a deck relying on landfall triggers, and a 4-color one at that, we're playing 4 Fable Passage, and a 3-2-1-1 split on 7 basic lands. Combining these 27 dedicated lands with the 8 mull DFCs gives this deck a grand total of 35 lands, helping ensure a land drop on almost every turn. Omnath and friends are pretty focused on their own game plan, so instead of any sweeping changes between main and sideboards, we're going to focus on a selection of cards that help boost our numbers against various matchups in the format. 2 Magma Spray and 2 Red Cat melee to help against creature-based strategies, on top of 2 Fry for the Omnath mirror or decks making heavy use of Planeswalkers. I've also included 2 copies of Back to Nature to bring it against auras in the occasional Doom Foretold / Yorion control matchup. 2 Scavenging Ooze because we're a green deck with excess amounts of green mana. 3 copies of Mystical Dispute, and because I didn't forget about Dre, we're rounding things off with 2 copies of Dampening Sphere to help against that re-emerging Lotus Field matchup. This deck comes highly recommended for anyone who wants to use the recently banned Omnath Locus of Creation without feeling beholden to abusing it with Uro and Growth Spiral. And don't be surprised if this isn't the last you've seen of our elemental friends on this channel or over on Twitch, because this deck ended up being a lot of fun in testing. Once again, this has been Ruckman with Crew3. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the little bell notification icon to know when new videos go live. You can find our weekly podcast on all major platforms alongside weekly deck techs here on YouTube or streaming multiple nights a week on Crew3 MTG at Twitch. Finally, thank you to all of our wonderful supporters at Patreon. If you'd like to see your name at the end of this video and streams as well as receiving other benefits, head on over to patreon.com/Crew3MTG. I'll talk to y'all next week. Bye!